My name is Rebecca Monroe, and for most of my life, I learned how to stand tall in silence. I learned it on steel decks before sunrise, in briefing rooms where one wrong word could cost lives, and in oceans so wide they taught you how small ego really was. I learned it long before the night my own mother called me a failure in front of a room full of strangers. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have protected you, if you've ever swallowed your pride to keep the peace, then you already understand the kind of woman I became. I didn't grow up wealthy or celebrated. I grew up in Navy housing, the daughter of a senior enlisted chief who came home with grease under his fingernails and discipline in his spine. While other kids learned how to charm adults, I learned how to listen, how to observe, how to wait. The Navy was never a dream for my mother. To her, it was a phase. Something you did until life began. For me, it was the first place that made sense. Order. Accountability. Results. I rose through the ranks quietly. No scandals, no shortcuts, no favors. Just performance. By my mid-40s, I was commanding operations across the Pacific, thousands of sailors moving on timelines I approved, decisions I made rippling across maps most people never saw. In uniform, I was respected. Outside of it, in my own family, I was tolerated at best. They called me the career one. The lonely one. The one who chose work over real life. I let it slide. I paid for emergencies, showed up when I could, sent money when I couldn't. I told myself that love sometimes looked like patience. That belief was tested the night my younger sister announced her engagement. I was overseas when the message came through official channels first, then a phone call from my mother, not to ask if I was coming, but to instruct me. Dress appropriately, she said. And please, Rebecca, don't make it about your uniform. I stood in my office overlooking the harbor as she spoke, destroyers aligned like chess pieces under my authority, junior officers outside my door snapping to attention when I passed. To my mother, none of that mattered. My sister, Claire, was marrying a Navy SEAL officer. That, apparently, was real military. Not what I did behind planning tables and classified doors. I asked his name. She said it with pride, like a trophy. Captain Daniel Hayes. Deployed multiple times. A hero. Unlike desk officers. I didn't correct her. I never did anymore. Correction required energy, and I'd learned she wasn't listening for truth. She was listening for confirmation. When I landed stateside days later, the family group chat was already full. 17 messages about venues, menus, guest lists. I'd been added late, almost as an afterthought. Claire messaged me privately. Mom says you're coming. Please don't make this awkward. I stared at that sentence longer than I care to admit. Don't make this awkward. As if my existence was the problem. As if I needed to shrink so she could shine. I replied with congratulations and nothing else. Back on base, I pressed my dress whites myself. Not because I had to, but because ritual steadies the mind. The iron's heat, the crisp lines forming under pressure, the quiet reminder that control is built, not given. A junior officer joked that family reunions were just delayed performance reviews. I smiled politely and said nothing. The truth was harder. I had spent decades reminding them who I was, and it had never stuck. The night before the engagement dinner, I shared takeout with my executive officer, a woman who knew me better than most. When I told her the groom was a SEAL, she laughed into her food. Does your family have any idea who you are? I shrugged. They have an idea. It's just wrong. She asked why I was going at all. I didn't have a clean answer. Family, hope, habit. Maybe all three. The country club in Florida was exactly what you'd imagine. Polished marble, expensive perfume, laughter that carried just a little too loud. I parked far from the entrance, checked my ribbons one last time, and walked in alone. When I entered the private dining room, no one stopped talking. My mother noticed me first. Her smile tightened. "Oh, you actually came," she said, projecting her voice. "Everyone, this is my daughter Rebecca. The one who never figured life out." The room laughed, uncertainly. Not cruel, but compliant. I felt the old reflex rise, the instinct to absorb the blow quietly. Instead, I walked forward calmly. Claire hugged me briefly, stiff as glass. My mother gestured to the man beside her. "This is Captain Daniel Hayes. Real military." He stood and extended his hand, polite, confident, distracted. "Nice to meet you, ma'am." His eyes scanned my uniform automatically, then stopped. I saw the exact moment it hit him. The insignia. The stars. The realization detonated behind his eyes before his body reacted. His hand dropped. His heels snapped together. His right hand shot up in a salute so sharp it cut the air. "Rear Admiral Monroe, ma'am," he said, voice loud enough to silence the room. "I apologize. I didn't recognize you out of context." The laughter died instantly. Forks froze. Conversations collapsed into nothing. I returned the salute, slow and steady. "At ease, Captain." He obeyed, but his posture remained rigid, mortified. Around us, faces shifted as people recalculated everything they thought they knew. Someone whispered, "She outranks him." My mother stared at me like I'd stepped out of someone else's life. "You never said you were an admiral," she whispered. "I did," I replied evenly. "You just didn't hear it." Questions followed from his teammates, from guests who suddenly leaned forward, eager. Commands. Operations. Assignments they'd studied. I answered simply, without pride or apology. Each answer dismantled the story they built about me. My sister didn't speak. Dinner continued in fragments, but the damage was done. When I excused myself early, Captain Hayes stood again, respectful, humbled. "It was an honor, ma'am." Outside, the humid air wrapped around me as I walked to my car. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. Clear about who I was. Clear about who they'd chosen me to be instead. And clear that something in me had finally shifted. I drove away knowing the salute wasn't the moment that changed everything. It was what came after. And that's where this story really begins. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of anger, and not because of triumph. It was the kind of wakefulness that comes when a long-held illusion finally collapses. I lay in the small guest apartment the Navy had arranged, staring at the ceiling, replaying the dinner in fragments. Not my mother's words. I'd heard those my whole life. Not even the salute itself. It was the silence afterward. The moment when everyone realized the story they'd been laughing along with was wrong. By morning, I knew one thing with certainty. I was done negotiating my worth. The next day, there was supposed to be a family brunch. Casual. Relaxed. A chance to smooth things over. My phone buzzed early. My mother calling. I let it ring. She called again. I declined again. A voicemail followed, sharp and wounded. "So now you're too good to show up. You embarrassed everyone last night and now you're running away." Typical. I saved the voicemail, not to punish her, but to remind myself later that clarity often looks like cruelty to people who benefited from your silence. Instead of brunch, I went for a run on base. The rhythm of my breath, the cadence of my stride, the familiarity of the perimeter fence grounding me. I boarded the earliest flight back without telling anyone. At 30,000 feet, I opened my laptop and began drafting an email. It took hours. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I refused to say it in anger. Mom, Claire. I love you. But I need distance. The way I'm treated isn't healthy for me, and I won't continue shrinking to keep the peace. I wish you both well. I'll be focusing on my command. I read it over and over. Then I sent it and turned my phone off. When I landed, there were dozens of messages. I deleted them unread. Work welcomed me back like it always did. Clean. Demanding. Honest. Strategy briefings. Readiness inspections. Decisions with real consequences. My executive officer noticed the change immediately. You're lighter, she said one evening. I nodded. I set something down. Weeks passed. The Navy Times ran a feature on our strike group. I didn't send it to my family. Someone else did. My sister texted one word. Wow. I didn't respond. My mother left a voicemail saying she was proud, that she hadn't realized how important my role was. I deleted it. Pride that arrives after public validation isn't pride. It's self-protection. My father called. I answered. He didn't talk around it. Your mother's struggling, he said. Not because of your rank. Because she can't rewrite the past anymore. I told him I loved him. I told him I wasn't angry. Just finished. A month later, Claire called. I almost didn't answer. Her voice was different. Smaller. Her fiancé had deployed. Suddenly, the silence between messages scared her. The not knowing. The waiting. She asked if that's what my life had been like. I said yes. She apologized. Not perfectly. Not fully. But honestly. I didn't rush to forgive. I thanked her for saying it. We ended the call without resolution, but with truth. That was enough for now. I poured myself into mentorship. Young officers, especially women, who looked at me the way I once looked at commanders who seemed untouchable. I told them what no one had told me. That ambition wasn't a flaw. That respect earned was worth more than approval begged for. One ensign told me her family thought she'd joined the Navy because she couldn't do better. I told her the people who can't see your value aren't qualified to measure it. She cried. I stayed steady. Months later, a wedding invitation arrived. Cream paper. Elegant script. My full rank printed clearly. Rear Admiral Rebecca Monroe. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't want to be a spectacle. I didn't want to be a lesson. I just wanted to exist without apology. My father called and asked if I was coming. Not for them, he said quietly. For you. That did it. I agreed. I didn't ask permission about my uniform. I didn't announce my arrival. I just showed up. The wedding was beautiful. I sat in the back. Watched my sister smile the way she hadn't in years. When our eyes met, she smiled at me. Not embarrassed. Not defensive. Just glad. At the reception, I spoke with people who asked real questions. Who listened. My mother approached later, hesitant. She apologized. Properly this time. She admitted she'd made me small because my success scared her. I told her the truth. That I was willing to try again, but not at the cost of myself. She agreed. Time would tell if she meant it. When I left that night, I felt something close to peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because nothing was hidden anymore. Back at my command, life accelerated. Exercises across the Pacific. Complex operations. The quiet satisfaction of watching thousands of sailors execute flawlessly because of systems I helped build. Then the orders came. Promotion. Vice Admiral. 3 stars. Strategic Command. When my father pinned the 3rd star to my collar months later, his hands shook. Mine didn't. I'd already carried the weight long before the medal ever touched my uniform. My family attended. This time, they didn't need an explanation. They watched. They listened. They learned. I didn't need their awe. Just their respect. As the ceremony ended and the sun dipped low over the water, I stood alone for a moment, looking out at the fleet. I thought about the woman I used to be. The one who kept proving. The one who kept explaining. The one who thought endurance was the same as love. She'd done her job. She got me here. But she wasn't needed anymore. Because respect, real respect, isn't demanded. It's not begged for. And it's not performed for family dinners. It's built, quietly, over years, until one day the truth salutes you whether people are ready or not. The promotion ceremony ended with applause, handshakes, and cameras flashing, but the real moment happened later, when the crowd thinned and the noise faded. I stood alone at the edge of the pier, the Pacific stretching out in front of me, dark and steady, like it always had been. 3 stars rested on my collar now. Vice Admiral Rebecca Monroe. The title felt heavy, but not unfamiliar. I'd been carrying its weight long before anyone pinned it there. What surprised me wasn't the pride. It was the quiet. No need to explain myself. No need to defend choices. No need to translate my life into something smaller so others could digest it. For the first time, my family didn't ask what I did or why it mattered. They simply saw it. And more importantly, I no longer needed them to. The weeks that followed were relentless. Transition briefings, strategic planning sessions, meetings that stretched late into the night. My scope widened from operational command to long-term decisions that would shape policy, posture, and people across the Pacific. It was different work. Less visible. More political. And infinitely consequential. I thrived in it. My days were filled with problems that had answers and teams that respected clarity. My nights were quiet. No guilt. No obligation. Just rest. My relationship with my family settled into something new. Not warm and constant, but honest and manageable. My mother called less, but when she did, she asked real questions. Not performative ones. My sister stopped comparing our lives and started sharing hers. Sometimes awkwardly. Sometimes clumsily. But without the old edge. My father remained steady, unchanged, the same anchor he'd always been. The biggest shift wasn't theirs. It was mine. I stopped anticipating disappointment. Stopped bracing for dismissal. Stopped preparing speeches in my head to justify my existence. When my mother slipped into old patterns, I named it calmly and ended the conversation if it continued. No anger. No drama. Just boundaries. And here's the part no one tells you. Boundaries don't fix people. They reveal them. When I stopped over-functioning, the dynamic changed because it had to. The jokes stopped landing. The comparisons fell flat. There was nothing left to push against. At work, young officers continued to find their way into my office, usually with the same look I'd worn years earlier. Smart. Capable. Unsure if they were allowed to want more. I told them the truth. That ambition isn't loud. That leadership isn't about being liked. That respect doesn't come from proximity or blood or approval. It comes from consistency. One lieutenant asked how I balanced duty with family pressure. I told her I didn't. I chose duty, then built a life that could hold it. Another asked what I'd said to my mother in that moment at the engagement dinner. I told her nothing. Silence had done the work. The salute had done the rest. Time passed. Missions came and went. Decisions stacked upon decisions. One night, long after midnight, I stood in a command center watching data scroll across screens, tracking ships and aircraft moving through dark water. Thousands of people executing orders they trusted me to give. That trust mattered more than applause ever could. It grounded me. It reminded me why I'd chosen this path when it would have been easier to choose another. Not easier emotionally, but socially. Acceptable. Palatable. Smaller. I thought back to the woman I'd been before that dinner. The one who paid quietly. Who apologized reflexively. Who kept showing up hoping to be seen. I didn't resent her. I respected her. She survived long enough to get me here. But she wasn't running the show anymore. That job belonged to someone else now. Someone who knew that love without respect is just obligation. Someone who understood that family doesn't get unlimited access simply because they share your name. Someone who had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away without slamming the door. Months later, I received a message from my sister. A simple update. No guilt. No ask. Just life. I replied in kind. We weren't close the way we'd once been, but we were real. And that was better. My mother sent a photo one afternoon. She'd framed an article about my promotion. It hung in her living room now. I looked at it for a long time before responding. Not because I needed the validation, but because I recognized the effort. Progress isn't perfection. It's direction. And direction matters. That night, I sat alone in my quarters and wrote something down, a habit I'd picked up over the years. Not goals. Not plans. Truths. I wrote that I was no longer interested in being understood by people committed to misunderstanding me. That respect, once earned, should never be renegotiated. That walking away doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes it means you finally succeeded. If you're listening to this and parts of it sting, that's not an accident. This story isn't about rank or titles or uniforms. It's about what happens when the people who raised you decide who you are before you get to speak. It's about what it costs to keep proving yourself to an audience that's already decided not to applaud. And it's about the moment you stop performing. The night my sister's fiancé saluted me didn't change my life because it embarrassed my family. It changed my life because it showed me something undeniable. I didn't need to convince anyone. The truth stands on its own. And when you finally accept that, you're free. Free to lead. Free to love selectively. Free to choose peace over proximity. So here's where I leave you. If you've ever been minimized by family, what boundary actually worked for you? Would you have stayed for that dinner or walked out earlier? What would you have said in that moment, if anything at all? And if you're military, or love someone who is, How do you balance duty with family pressure without losing yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this story gave you clarity or strength, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs permission to stop shrinking. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't proving who you are. It's deciding who gets access to you once you already know.